Hello and welcome to Ditching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. Today I am joined by guest Russ Waddell. Russ, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
So today we are going to talk about Russ's first 18 months of freelancing as a value pricing native, never billed by the hour. But first, Russ, could you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Russ Waddell, and I have a long background in manufacturing, mostly machine tools and industrial equipment. I've had a variety of different jobs in that space, supporting sales and marketing, and then moving over to the tech side. I did some standards development for a while and spent a lot of time in IoT and connectivity. Got over to the sort of the software side of things.
And what did you do before you were freelancing?
I had the same job from graduating college straight through uh, 15 years almost. So I had
Wow.
one job. It was at the same company. It was at an association, the Association for Manufacturing Technology, which is an old style trade body representing equipment builders. And I started there as an economist because I'd studied econ in school.
Hmm.
And they were willing to hire me without a graduate degree to a job that had the title of economist, which I thought was really great.
Mhm.
Did that for a while and didn't really like econ as a profession as much as I thought I would, and
Mhm.
wanted to get to some other thing. So I took a stepping stone job that was going to eventually get me to software. And the stepping stone job ended up being uh, more like 8 or 10 years.
And what prompted you to go out on your own?
So I moved from the association after 14 or 15 years. I got recruited to pretty successful startup, and wanted to, like, I was still pretty happy doing what I was doing, but I was also getting itchy feet about, what's the next career stage? What happens next? What's the rest of my life look like? Can't really do this forever kind of feelings. So I took the job, but it was fully remote. I lasted less than a year at that. I liked it for the most part, but it was kind of right company, wrong time.
Hmm.
And I left that job, went looking for what I called real jobs, and had offers of contract and freelance work
Hmm.
basically right away.
Huh.
So formed an LLC less than a week after I quit and haven't looked back.
Cool. Okay. So, like you probably know, and a lot of listeners would know, most people, when they start freelancing or going solo consulting, something like that, they usually don't think, should I bill by the hour? They think, what should my hourly rate be? But that isn't what you did. What do you think is the difference?
So it's a very explicit difference. So I had been getting some mentoring even before I left that job from somebody who was a longtime fan and member of the Jonathan Stark Ditcherville community.
Oh.
And he had introduced me basically as soon as I left and talked about freelancing. I had a weekly call set with him. I told him, "Hey, I quit." He said, "Do you still want to have our call?" I said, "Sure." And instead of being a call about technology, that ended up being a call about, well, what's it like to be a soloist or a freelancer.
Mm.
At that point, he sort of turned me on to your material. I binged the podcasts, read a bunch of blog posts, and I, essentially the first time I wrote an invoice, I just didn't put anything about time on it.
Nice. It's working. My-
Nobody complained, right? Like that
right.
there was no one unhappy about that situation. I just said, "I'm gonna we're gonna get on the phone when you need me. We're gonna talk about these things. Uh, how's $500?" The company didn't have a ton of money at the time. They're like, "Yeah, sure,
Mhm.
well, we can throw you $500 since we're gonna look at what a deeper engagement would look like with you. So sure, we can give you some money for this." I had already been talking to them on the side, but it was very much like a nights and weekends thing.
Mhm.
And when I got the startup job, I had sort of really ramped down the conversations with that company. Um, the founder had since quit his full-time job, and so, there was background about this. It wasn't completely cold that I walked into it,
Mhm.
but the part that was totally new to me and I really would have known what to do was how do I charge at all for this? What do I charge? What do I write? What's an invoice look like? I'm Googling invoice for small business and
Mhm.
looking for a template for that.
So where did this lead come from? This was this first $500 thing, where did the lead come from? It's just like, I mean, you must have a huge network having worked at a trade body for over a decade, but
Yeah.
how did they know, like, how did you get the word out that you were potentially going to be
S
available for this kind of
so I
stuff?
never really did. I mean, the networking was a universal nonstop thing over my whole career, right? So the nice thing about working in a volunteer group or a trade body or anything that's sort of a collective is typically you're not in a position of being a competitor, you're not in a position of being a customer, you're not in a position of being a supplier. you are a harmless and neutral third party, and that has all sorts of implications. Some of them are negative. You're not really seen as a true partner necessarily, but on the other hand, people will tell you everything.
Mhm.
And so this particular company, it's a guy that was quite a bit younger than I am, and he has well, I met him when he was doing a PhD in mechatronics, and essentially at some point he was partway through it. He seemed pretty sharp. We'd had some success on a couple projects. I took him to lunch and I said, "Hey, look, you have a skill set that not a lot of people have, and you're never going to have a hard time finding work. So keep me in mind in the future." That was
Mhm.
easily 6 years before I get the $500 check from him as my first freelance check.
Wow. You mentioned that you did some projects with him back then, though. What does that mean in this context?
So while he was a PhD student, the company I was working for, we had a trade show demo we wanted to do. So I'd moved at that point from market research and econ to standards, and we wanted to get somebody who had set up a little bit of equipment, had a little tabletop display, and could show here's what this product can do. So I was basically in a product management role for this machine to machine communication protocol. And he was doing a PhD thesis, which included a component of using that protocol. So he had the protocol knowledge. He was the engineer. I was doing product management. It was essentially a marketing function, and we'd set up this trade show demo. And it was a really interesting time. I think it was probably 2014 or 15, sometime around then.
Hmm.
Uh, where there were a lot at the time, there weren't a ton of software companies that were sort of mainstream Bay Area startups or anything entering manufacturing and heavy industrials. So there's a little event in San Francisco where we were going to smush together people from old heavy industry and people from software startups, VCs, et cetera. And so that was how we ended up, you know, knowing each other
Mhm.
and the knowing that we had potential to work together in the future. And we talked about what his future was going to be after he graduated, whether he wanted a corporate gig. He kind of always had in his mind that he was going to be his own boss.
Mm.
And that led eventually to sort of his small business dreams blossoming.
Cool. Okay. So then fast forward something like 6 years, you guys are in touch. He throws you $500. What was that for? Was it just a consult?
Uh, I mean, I picked up exactly what I'd been doing before, right? So he had at that point, probably 4 or 5, maybe more, engineers working for him. They were doing some product development. So they were making a physical device that you could plug a bunch of stuff into and it would send data to a service or a cloud, right? So it was basically a month's worth of, hey, I will help you with the pieces of this that need help. And it was super scrappy, super small. It was it was basically like, tell me what you need and I'll do it. And we'd already been having a conversation about kind of what his top needs were. So I just sort of slotted right into that. And the money piece was really nothing but a cash flow conversation. It had nothing to do with what I was doing, how much it was worth, anything else. It was just like, this is a bridge to get you to whatever the next dollars you're going to make are.
Mm. Okay. And how did that go? How long did it last?
I think I made it. I think I got like 4 or 5 months, and the amount changed. But I then had a number of other contracts come in. I had some paid speaking engagement. This was 3 months in. I had a reference. Somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, can you come speak?" I said, "Sure." I'm not with the company anymore, so you got to cover my expenses. So a couple $1,000 for that presentation. And then the kind of, I would guess, the break that made me feel like this is actually going to work and I don't really need to go find a job was I ended up on a medium sized contract back with the association again.
Hmm.
But in this case, it was, instead of here's a job, you're an employee, do what we say whenever we say it. It was just, here's one line item, and you're going to do that thing, and it's going to be on a 3-month contract. And again, we didn't talk about hours. It was just, call me and check in, give me a monthly report. We'll figure it out as we go.
Mm. Okay. So as you were working with the first guy, with the engineers on
Hmm.
the hub, wherever it was,
Yep.
then where are these other leads coming from? You must have done something to let people know that you were available.
Yeah. So at the beginning of 2023, that was when I quit, as January, February. And then, because I didn't have a, big, large contract or a book of work at that point, I was just on the phone, email, LinkedIn. Just basically, I did a dialing for dollars type of campaign where I just called everybody and said, "Hey,
Mm.
I quit." they all knew that I'd been at this startup job. There were a lot of people that were sort of watching what was going on, and I, had periodic updates anyway. So it wasn't like, hey, here's a new conversation about how I'm available. It was, hey, it's been X amount of time since we talked. My update this week is I don't have a job.
Mhm. Okay. So, yeah, so what I'm hearing is a lot of lead activity, and it's all basically coming from just a massive network of people in a super specific space. Is
It
that fair to
didn't
say?
it didn't feel massive until
Okay.
I started comparing to what other people's networks might look like or how they would get that network. And I would hear things like people would introduce me and say, "Oh, here's Russ. He knows everybody." I'm
Yeah.
like, "No, and there's tons of people I don't know. That can't be right." But that kept coming up. So I do think that the position and the size of that network and the amount of time put into it. So it wasn't like, "Oh, I decided to be a freelancer. Let me build my network for a year." It
Yeah.
was, "I have a network. Let me leverage that to freelance."
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, great if you have it. That's super huge. And as you're saying, you probably didn't, maybe took it for granted or didn't realize it was a lot of leverage, but it really is.
I knew that I knew a lot of people. It never occurred to me that they would pay me to do stuff.
And what did they how were you positioned in their mind? So, like, they knew you had what would they say if they introduced you to, or, like, they referred you to someone? They say, "Oh, this is Russ, he knows everyone. He's the guy for."
I would get a lot of so th this is actually a pretty significant piece, right? So I was getting a lot of things that were promising leads were picking up on the, "Hey, here's Russ, he knows everybody. Let's use that in a business development or sales or customer acquisition, function."
Okay.
And the interesting thing about that piece is I kinda had this feeling that as soon as I start going to my network and saying, "Hey, I'm here and now I'm selling this,"
Mhm.
the value that I bring to that network plummets,
Mhm.
right? So the irony is the thing that everybody knows, "Oh, Russ knows everybody," is exactly the thing that they wanna cash in on, which is exactly the thing that will make it not work anymore.
Yeah, no longer a harmless third party.
Yeah, so I think that getting to getting to what I could do instead of simply sell my network to
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
was important, and it took some time, and that was sort of phase 1 is I don't have a job. I need to figure out if like, what I'm gonna do in my life now. Phase 2 was I have some money, and it's not as much as I was making before, but I have a lot of time to, raise my kids now and call everybody else and look for other things and get my bearings, spruce up my website. That sort of stuff was sort of the
Okay.
second phase. Then the third phase was I've done the information gathering. I know that right now I have this reputation as having this great network, and I know that one of the things people want from it is to basically buy that. But I also know that that's not feasible. What are the other things I can do next? So it kind of between my wife being gainfully employed and savings that we had and these smaller contracts, it gave me a lot of room to operate and kind of
Mhm.
navigate what would happen next.
Mhm.
And that basically I spent, 6 months plus on what am I going to do now? What's my identity as a worker? What do people care about? And that was probably up until I'd been about a year out. And then
Mhm.
only in the last 6 months or so have I kind of felt like, okay, I'm really going to do this probably forever. And I have a lot of really good ideas of what I would do next. And none of them are sell your network. All of them are specific to, non-sales tasks that I'm interested in.
For example, like, what are some of the, I mean, I know it's only been
Yeah, yeah.
18 months, but
Um, so there are I don't think it's that I don't want to do sales. I think it's more about there are ways that you can remove obstacles and grease the wheels of a sales process or a product development process that don't involve necessarily being a direct frontline selling role.
mhm,
And those are the things that I'm interested in. So thinking about, and it sounds ridiculous to talk about strategy or to talk about advisory, but basically, if you get to a place where you have people that know they need somebody that they can trust, they're not 100% sure exactly what they need, but you come to mind for them.
right.
It's typically going to be based on having industry knowledge plus a network plus having a good sense of business acumen and being able to quickly understand what their business objectives are. And the piece that is selling, but I'm not selling to their customers. I'm selling to them. I'm selling, I can quickly understand what the thing that's keeping you up at night. I think a lot of that came from ditching hourly. Some of it was inherent. Some of it was from the market research where that was an important job. Some of it was the cat herding piece of being a standards developer that required you to kind of get people's pain points quickly. And if you'd have told me when I was setting out to be a freelancer that you could just not really worry about it and traffic and network and the rest of it will kind of fall into place, I would have called you crazy. But right
Mhm.
now, I mean, ask me again in another year or two, but it seems like essentially stringing together, here's a thing I can do. Here's how I quoted it. Here's what 15 minutes worth of quoting at a fixed price looked like. And I'll just take a bunch of those and use those as data collection and see what I have to, pivot the business into over the next couple of years and not worry too much about it as long as the work keep coming in that I'm interested in.
Okay, so you're in a highly specialized space.
Hmm.
Did you think about branching out, or would that just be comical?
Man, so yeah, I started out, this is a long arc, but I started out where my audience was sales and marketing people. And this goes all the way back to right after college. So my audience as a worker, an employee, was people who make machine tools and are a member of this particular association and want sales and market data.
Mhm.
That felt like a very small market.
Mhm.
So I intentionally tried to expand and say, okay, my next audience would be people who manufacture things and are interested in software and connectivity to computer controlled machinery. And that audience was probably, I'm estimating here, but it was 100 or 1,000 times larger than the first
Mhm.
audience easily.
Yeah.
And so now I'm thinking that for a while I was thinking, okay, so do I go beyond, this particular heavy industry, automotive, aerospace, oil and gas, which I know pretty well? Do I need to move into medicine and packaged goods and consumer products? And I don't think so, but it's also kind of in the back of my mind. I don't know that I would necessarily have to intentionally pivot. It's going to be based on who do I meet, what do they want me to do, what are they willing to pay me for, how much, how do I like it once I get there, and how transferable is the stuff I already know. That's kind of what's going to dictate the next expansion. So I think I have skills that are probably applicable outside of manufacturing, but when you combine, what's essentially the skill set of a consultant from, the typical big four consulting companies and things like that. It's hard to take that vague skill set and then not also leverage, hey, I know people about this industry, know people in this industry, and I know about this industry. I think the two of those together are really helpful, and
Yeah.
that makes me a little bit hesitant to intentionally try and branch out any further.
Right. Yeah, I like that attitude. That sort of like, well, I'll see who I attract,
Hmm.
and if I feel like doing it, and then I decide to do it, and then I like it, and it just happens organically. That's cool. But you have a built. But I could feel myself instantly, instantly get nervous when you said like consumer packaged goods, and I'm like, come on, you know, it's like if that happens, great. But if someone was like, if some I was talking to someone and they were like, oh yeah, I'm really well known in the manufacturing space, but what I really want to do is, direct, or what I really want to
Hmm.
do is, is just totally a different network. And I'd be like, all right, what are you gonna, what's the value proposition? Like how are you different from the big four or any other consultant that, it's like in your history is super huge. It's like street, I usually call it street cred. It's like, everybody knows you, know you for a thing, and yeah, and I applaud the attitude of like, if it happens organically, great, but not forcing it because that just would be like, why? Why would you do that? I mean,
It's
it's
fun.
not like
It's funny.
manufacturing is too small.
No, not at all. It's funny you mentioned I want to direct being a pivot.
Mhm.
I've had conversations with founders who've exited, now they've got money, and they were fabricating products for artists in the past, and then they were fabricating products for prop houses.
Mm.
And I've approached these guys going, "Hey, do you want to do movies?" This is
Mhm.
the late night conversations, right? But
Yeah.
I don't I'm interested in the industry of movie making because it's a large industry that America has a huge lead in, and it's often forgotten that there's all these different pieces that go into making movies, and a lot
Mhm.
of them are physical or built, right? And that stuff's really interesting to me.
Mm.
And I don't have a whole lot of, I'm for a really long time, I've thought about what would be the avenues into movies. So you've got things like robotic camera equipment, you've got robotic display stuff. I have some experience in that, and that would be a pivot point. I've never like made an effort to go network my way into that, but back in my mind has always been, here's how I would apply the stuff that I already know if now I had uh, an opportunity that was in movie production. Here would be what I already thought about, so that it's not fresh the first time I talk about it.
Right. Smart. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, I don't know if it's smart. It's just I've spent a lot of time pondering.
When I've pivoted in the past, it's always been like that, where I've got this in the back of my mind. I've got this little bin of
Oh yeah,
ideas that I'm like, oh, when I was doing FileMaker a million years ago, I was like, I really want to be doing web development, but it was over my head back then. It
yep.
was really hard, and I mean it's hard now too, but it was really hard back then. Like you're sitting in Barnes and Noble reading like my SQL books, and and but I knew I was like, boy, it really would be cool though. That would really be cool. And so when little opportunities do pop up, you pounce and you're like, yeah, yeah, teach me that.
You have a bin of it would really be cool if I consider mine a shelf, but
Mhm.
otherwise exactly the same.
Yeah. And so you start collecting stuff. So then the shelf's not completely empty.
Another one on my shelf. This is a good one.
Okay.
Underwater robotic welding.
Cool. So cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
someday.
Right. Right. And you have a few of those things and it's almost like a string in the sugar water. And you're like, see if any crystals form on it. And you just wait and see. And if nothing does, then well, no big deal. You didn't like spend a year and $50,000 trying to, fly around and go to conferences for these sorts of things.
Yeah, manage your risk and be patient.
Yeah. 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 So can you give folks a little bit of an idea of what a project looks like for you to the extent that you can? I mean, it's not like you've got 10 years of solo consulting under your belt. But what does a project look like and how do you price it? What does the negotiation look like? Just because I feel like we've been talking pretty high level, which is good. But getting into the nuts and bolts of it for people that are maybe thinking about going out on their own.
Yep. Um, I think so. My first point here is work from what the exchange is going to look like, right? So if you're gonna have to invoice somebody, or you're gonna have to charge them in some way, work backwards from what what you're gonna write down as here's the thing I'm charging you for, and what you're gonna pay me for it. So I think something as simple as the actual template for here's what an invoice looks like. Anything from Google would be fine. Don't, I mean, in my case, I think it would be a waste of time to do anything more than an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Doc. But get the line items and the amount and what the units would be for that, and make the invoice look like something you're comfortable with. And then from there, make your proposals look like what the invoice would be. At one point, I was literally taking the same template. It was the invoice template, and I just said, "Here's forward-looking 6 items that I'm gonna do next month." And that was the mechanics of starting to quote work.
So let me say that back just to make sure
Yeah.
I understand. So you're like eventually, maybe after you're done, let's just say you're going to invoice these people. Here's what the invoice would look like, and then you would write a proposal from that.
Yep.
So it's not
Uh,
like
yeah, so that well, I would actually no, let me be more specific. I wouldn't even write the proposal from that. I would take, here was last month I invoiced you for $500, right? So my magical first 500,
mhm.
I took that invoice itself and whatever I wrote in there, services for so and so month. And there were a couple line items in there of what I'd worked on, just so they had a record of what was getting done. I was talking to this guy all the time, so it didn't really matter, but it was there for our own record keeping.
Mhm.
And then I gave him, hey, here's my plan for next month. And based on those conversations, I gave him, an invoice that was basically dated for the next month, but then changed the word at the top from invoice to proposal.
Okay. Okay. And were you getting paid in advance or in arrears?
Arrears.
Okay. And have you had to is that how it's worked with any other gigs that you've gotten? You just sort of like drop an invoice or you like how does it work?
So it got somehow more casual than that afterwards.
Uh-huh.
Um, so the stuff that I've actually landed and fully gotten paid and collected, and isn't just sort of stuff I've sent out and didn't land. The stuff I've gotten paid is people that they've decided that they want me to work for them. And all of the details are how much is it going to cost and what's the scope that's going to fit with however much they can afford. So
Mhm.
they want me, they have a number in mind, and everything else is scope, right? And
Mhm.
so these are people that I've known for years and years and years and years and years and years, and they're like, whatever it is, we'll figure it out. And so
Okay.
those tend to be boilerplate consulting or contracting agreements that come from their side, and then a couple of lines of scope stuck in at the back.
Mhm.
Um, and then and at that point, then the invoices go from having line items of what I was going to do to I'm now working from whatever that last page with 5 lines of scope on it was. I'm just working to that scope, and I just invoice and say services month, whatever. Yes, I
Yep.
charge monthly and always in arrears so far. I think I get paid upfront for one contract now.
Mm. Okay. So what what do the engagements look like? Are they on site? Are they remote? Is it a lot of meetings? Is it a lot of writing? Is it a lot of research? Are you in a lab building things? I have no.
Yeah, this was the arc and thing. This was one of much like trying to figure out what on earth am I selling these people. Like I had who the people are. I had things that I can do. I even had things that I can do with these people. But what am I actually transacting with them on?
Mhm.
That was the part that it took a long time to even get my footing, and I would say I'm very much not complete with figuring out what that actually looks like. So to answer your explicit question here, to do the direct answer to the question, last year it was all over the place. Um, I had some stuff where I was on site, some stuff where I was being paid and going to a conference and getting my expenses covered, some stuff where I was fully remote, presentations here and there. I had like committee meeting attendance that was a thing I did for somebody, and that was all remote. So those were super scattered, and I generally didn't like the mode switching very much. So the problems I had, back to phase one of I'm getting my feet wet here. The things I didn't like were constant mode switching, not knowing where the next dollars would come from, feeling like the balance of doing work versus having free time and flexibility had tipped too far towards flexibility and free time, and I wanted to do more work. And if I did, I might have already listed this, but also I was ready to make more money.
Mhm.
So the at the beginning of this year, then I started a much larger contract with the company that I worked for originally. So I had a small one last year, much larger one this year, and as part of that, they asked me to be on site. I was basically reporting to the president directly. So he said, "Hey, I need you to do these 5 things." Like I just described these other contracts. It was boilerplate, boilerplate, boilerplate. Here's line items of scope. He provided them to me. I said yes. We signed. I started a couple days later. And one of the stipulations somewhere in that contract was, "Hey, this is an on-site thing. It's 15 minutes away. I don't really mind being in the office." It is literally an office, and it is basically, do my 5 items mostly autonomously, but also be available whenever, wherever the president is looking for me.
What kinds of items are these things? Are they advisory or?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, so it's a bit of a unique case, right? So this is stuff that I don't think, I'm not sure that this is a thing that I could keep selling, right? The way that it worked was I've worked with this guy for a long time. He happens to be in a place where he needed particular things, and that's how it ended up working. And it's one where I don't know that I could repeat it. So
Right.
the initial kick, right, the kickoff is a funny story. So January 1st of this year, I remember telling somebody, "Man, I'm gonna have to get on the phone. I need a lot more work this year. I don't know. Last year was good. I'm still committed to freelancing, but I could definitely use some more work." And then January 2nd, my old contact sends me a note. He's like, "Hey, can you come in for a meeting? I want to talk about whether we can work with you this year." I said, "Sure, no problem." Go into the office, sit down for a half an hour meeting. "Hey, I want you back here full time." I said, "No, I don't want to work full time." We negotiated a little bit. I got the list of what the stuff he was after. And that the impetus was the CTO of that company had left on short notice. And I
Mhm.
had previously, you know, 2 jobs ago, I had reported to the CTO. And so the primary first item was, we've lost the CTO. I need somebody to fill the gap and manage the transition to a new
Mm.
person. So
Nice.
I'm suddenly going from random speeches and odds and ends and $500 checks to, internal executive search lead.
Right.
which like it's as insane as it sounds. That's crazy.
Yeah. It's so price-wise, he had a budget in mind already. Like, you
Yep.
didn't pick a price. He was just like, "I've got this much money. I want you in here full time." And then you're like,
Yep.
"I don't wanna do full time." So you basically, here's the money that's on the table, and then the negotiations around scope.
Yeah, and in that particular case, I don't think I'm saying anything that's too sensitive, but one of the reasons that I was hostile to full-time employment was the stuff that was described in the conversation. It wasn't a job, right? It was a series of things that needed to be done, but they wouldn't continue to be a job. If I'm going to
Mhm,
be salesperson or developer or vice president, these are things that have an indefinite scope. But
mhm.
we lost the CTO and we need to figure out what to do. Well, I mean that project is
It's a
concluded as
project.
soon as you have a new CTO. I don't want to
Yeah,
be the in-house project guy.
right. Yeah,
And
that's
I,
the perfect definition of a project. It's got such a clear end state.
yeah. So the conversational version, it was very easy for me to say, "Hey, this doesn't sound like a job. It sounds like a series of projects. If I take this job, we're both setting me up to fail because
Mhm,
we're going to get to the end of these projects, and now we're going to be having this conversation all over again. Why not just do it on contract?" I made a point that I was trying to sort of have fewer, larger contracts, and so then he phrased it back as, "Well, let me buy up all your hours for the year."
mm.
And I said, "Sure, if that helps, if that helps make it feel better, sounds good to me."
Right, and because you were looking to work more anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, cool. I think you mentioned in Ditcherville that you recently went to a big conference. Is that worth bringing up? Is that the kind of thing you're gonna, on the show here, and is that the kind of thing you're gonna keep doing to get your name out there, going to conferences?
Man, I mean, I had it. So when I quit the startup, this is gonna be a roundabout answer. Sorry. So
Mhm.
when I quit the startup, I wasn't really sure what to do next. I started podcasting a lot with a buddy of mine
Yep.
he'd propositioned me. So I was doing this very frequent podcasting. I was doing the dialing for dollars thing. 6 months after I left, somebody else left the same startup. And in my normal networking processes, he's like, "Hey, what's the deal? I'm trying to do this consulting thing. It sounds like I might be on a similar track to you, but you never updated your LinkedIn. I have no idea what you're up to.
Mm.
Why didn't you update that, Russ?" And I, I didn't have an answer. I had no answer to that question. I'm like, why didn't I update my LinkedIn and put my shingle out there, as they say?
Uh-huh.
And I thought about it a little bit more. I'm like, well, like I feel like I'm getting the stuff I need without it. And I don't necessarily want to do work for people that are coming to find me and that found me through LinkedIn. I think I like doing work for the people that, somehow heard through the grapevine that I'm available because that's a qualification that I
Yeah.
don't have to do.
Right.
And it also gives, I mean, maybe I'm making this up, but certainly it felt like there was a certain amount of exclusivity. And I talked in Ditcherville as well about, when is it time to use your own name versus use a company versus use your whatever else. And I
Mm.
think I'm still using my Gmail for the most part
Yeah.
for like going to find work. And this had been a back and forth. I think you put in there, well, anybody that's using Gmail, they're a noob. And
That's my reaction,
yeah,
and
right.
right, and it's just like, in spite of you not updating your LinkedIn, in spite of you using a personal Gmail,
Yeah.
in spite of all this stuff, like, listen to how powerful it is to have a big network. You know what I mean? Like, you're just, it's like, in spite of these things, it's like, I don't even need to update my LinkedIn. The jobs just come to me.
I think the test I was trying to run, that sounds very arrogant. I'm not, but I think that I think the test I was running is if I don't do any of the stuff, will it still work?
Uh-huh.
And so, so your original point was, am I going to go to big events and things like that? I mean, I think that's the stuff that I do instead. So if it's useful to be on LinkedIn and talk about, I'm going to go to this thing, or if it's useful, the thing I've used LinkedIn a ton for is, DMs. It's, hey, I'm going to this event and I don't have your phone number. I would have texted you, but I don't have your phone number. So here's
Mm,
your DM. I'll see you at the event. Look
mhm.
forward to chatting. Or here's the topic about which we should chat. Or here's a thing that I thought would be interesting for you. So I'm using LinkedIn to kind of know the list of who I'm connected to, see what company they work for, possibly see what projects they're on and what they're interested in. So it's an intelligence tool for networking, but
Mhm.
it's not an advertising tool in the sense that I am promoting what I'm up to. I mean, to give an
Right.
example, I had a speech at the conference. It's a trade show. very big, 100,000 people or so. And there's a conference, which I guess has a couple thousand people attend the conference. So the trade show is kind of like upstairs on the show floors, lots of equipment, gigantic booths, robots, lasers, very fancy, super cool. I'm not making any of that up.
That sounds awesome, actually.
It was awesome. And then, I'm downstairs in the conference. I've never been to this before after all the years I've been going to the show. Like somebody just asked me randomly, "Hey, can you present in the conference?" And I'm like, Sure. What about whatever you want?" "Oh, when?" Like, when do you need me? So I'm like, I'm thinking I might be speaking to an empty room.
Right.
And there were like 80 people in there.
Huh.
I did zero advertising. I wrote a title, which was, I mean, it was a good title. I think the title was Out of the Lab, uh, Digital Twin Hype versus Reality, which is a very trendy topic in the
Mhm.
space.
Mhm.
But my name, the title, brief summary of what I was going to talk about. That's it. 80 people showed up. And I had like great conversations with them afterward. The minute I was getting ready to go up and talk, I was terrified there'd be nobody there. Actually, I was most terrified that there would be two people there.
Yeah, that's the worst.
No people, you can just leave.
Right. Right. So that's amazing. Y so let's drill in a little bit. You use the phrase normal you said something like, "Oh, I just use it for my normal marketing process." So, like,
Yeah.
for people who can't imagine what that is, what is your normal marketing process?
Oh man, it's so amorphous in my head, but also omnipresent.
Mm,
I think it basically means, call people, text them, check in with your friends, think of them as friends, always be thinking about what you can do to help them. Um, be concise, don't be
mhm,
salesy. Be in a bunch of communities. So I pay for Ditcherville. I pay for Scope of Work, which is another paid Slack. Um, I have like 3 or 4 other free ones that I'm on, plus a couple Discord servers. Uh, yeah, I mean, professional societies, part of those too, and sometimes active, sometimes not. There's still some volunteering work I do. I sit on a board, which would, I used to be managing the product, and then eventually the board said, "Hey, can you come be on the board?" And I said, "This sounds like a way for you to get me to do work for the thing, but not pay me.
mhm,
Sure, I'll do it." So I mean, it's basically be in the places, I guess, and
mhm.
then try and be like listen, be a sponge, but also try and be helpful and don't be a stranger.
Do you have are you just like do you need to remind yourself to do it, or is this just this is like you living, like you're just a person who's
Mm,
always connecting with people?
it ebbs and flows. So there are times when I think, man, I am networking up a storm and everything's going amazing in my networking. There are other times when I'll get heads down in learning something technical or a time bounded effort. And this was when I was an employee and now too. That's all been the same.
Mhm,
And in those times, I'll sometimes think, man, I feel like the speed of meeting other people has gone down. Um, and I really ought to get back to that business. I looked at it as business development basically, and I was like, I need to get back to that business development. But
mhm,
I don't know. It doesn't feel hard if that's what you mean, and it doesn't feel like the general keeping up a network does not feel like a thing that I do
mhm,
or intend to do. The specifics of, oh, I have a, it would be cool if I talked to Jonathan about starting as a freelancer. That idea started week 2,
mhm,
and it was 18 months later before I sent you an email that said, "Hey, we should talk about this."
mm,
So the task of catalog what's the opportunity, go back to the opportunities, whether they're written down or just in my mind, and then the follow through on what does that actually look like. That stuff feels like a task.
mm,
But the you know keeping it warm doesn't feel like a task. I'm going to
mm.
go from keeping the network warm to now I have things I need to do. That's the part where it starts to feel tasky.
Right. Have you ever noticed, like, say, at the beginning of this year when you were mentioning you said you mentioned to someone like, "Oh, I really need to ramp things up this year,"
Hmm.
where has it ever gotten to the point where you felt like, "Hmm, I'm being a little pushy in my outreach," or, "It's smelling a little desperate the way I wrote that," or were you still comfortable enough that you could play the long game and be patient with the outreach?
Oh man, I mean, so leaving association land for the private sector definitely gave me whiffs of that. it worked out okay. It probably still would have worked out okay, even if I didn't stay. Even if I had stayed at the startup, it probably would have been fine.
Mhm.
Even though the startup needed results and needed specific things to be delivered, and not just sort of a general warm fuzzy feeling about how much everybody likes each other.
Mhm.
Um, but I think the bigger factor is the the fallback position is, do I have skills that I could just start applying for jobs and get paid for a regular job at any given time? So
Mhm.
I started as an economist, and there were not a ton of economist jobs. At this point, I could get an economist job that would sort of cover my share of contributions to the household, and it would probably be okay, even though I haven't done that in a long time.
Mhm.
And if I needed a tech job, um, you know, being paranoid early on that, hey, I don't want to be in I don't want to be in economics. I don't want to be a data analyst for the rest of my life. I don't like what the prospects are for that job. I don't like the work itself.
Mhm.
But what do all the people that do get paid? What do they have? And I'm like, oh, they have coding skills. Oh, they have technical skills. That was a big one. Was it? I had a bachelor of arts, and I was working in an industry that was pretty techy,
Mhm.
mechanical and software. And I was like, oh, I need more technical skills. I probably had like a 5-year arc where I'm trying to build up technical skills, and that included everything from learn to code, think about a boot camp. These are things I did not pull the trigger on, by the way. Do I need to learn to code? Should I go to a boot camp? Should I write a book? And all of it, it just didn't end up mattering. The way I got to technical skills was it was inseparable from the networking. So coattail people that know stuff that is highly technical in nature. Try and find the ways that you can contribute to them being more successful. As it turns out, building software or doing something that is a technical job often has less technical pieces that are needed alongside it, and just look for how you can be useful. And that ended up being enough. So at this
Mhm.
point, I think I have a reputation for being a relatively technical guy in the industry, as they say.
Mhm.
But I still don't code.
Mhm.
I still didn't write a book. And the people that are like saying, "Oh, he's technical." I think it mostly just comes down to I surround myself with engineers and developers a lot, and am not overstepping the bounds of what I do now.
Mm. Interesting. So I don't know. I guess I just want to amplify a couple things you said in the networking process. Um, be concise, treat them like your friends because they are, and just try and add value, soak things up like a sponge. That's all like super, super important. I wouldn't change a thing about it. One of the things that I think for people who are, I don't know if you consider yourself an extrovert, but that is kind of an extroverted behavior to
Definitely.
be, yeah. So for people who are more introverted, they get really paralyzed by it's like they make it into a big thing in their head. And I would consider myself more of an introvert than an extrovert. They make it into this bigger thing in their head because they're imagining. I get this a lot from people who they feel like they're being sneaky, and because they know that what they really want is a gig, and you want a gig. You just it's just that you don't. I'm putting words in your mouth, but it's like you want a gig, but you don't know what it's going to be or who it's going to come from, right? So you're just kind of like tending the garden, and maybe a tomato's going to come out, maybe a cucumber's going to come out, and so I guess I'm just for the introverted people listening who have a really hard time with this. It's like you're in a service business. Probably every single person listening to this is in some kind of professional service business, and y- you serve people. Service. You serve people. You're here to help. That's what you get paid for, helping people. So just do it all the time in your, in your downtime, whatever. Just go help people. Go in these groups and look for things that you can help with. And I usually call it answer bombing, but you're just talking about checking in with people. And I mean, concise. What, like, give people an example so they could be maybe have the courage to, or at least realize that is not the big deal that they think it is.
If you're an introvert, and particularly if you're an introvert in some sort of a technical or semi-technical field,
Right.
um, if it like listen to your gut. If it feels uncomfortable, then don't do that thing.
Hmm.
Figure out a way to make it not uncomfortable, and think of it as an equation or a set of steps or a process. So the "Hi Jonathan, how are you?" email it's not the goal. And the answer to that email is not the goal either. It is a step along a multi-step process. So look at it as the objective is I'm sending this email to say hello because I have something in common with this person that they may be interested in.
Mm.
And that's the whole goal. I mean, you said I don't, I mean, I always want to get the gig. That's true, but it's so far down
Right. It's so
from,
far away.
it's so buried in the transactions. So two things to read if you haven't read them and you're an introvert and you don't like selling. Just look up everything about consultative sales and read about pipeline development and get away from, it's like the fill your funnel style, right? So there's a top end of the funnel where you're going to get a lot. There's a pointy end of the funnel where you're going to have less, and split that up into stages. So growing the number of people who have come into the front end of the funnel. The goal is to fill up the top half of that funnel that's going to be wide and you're going to have a very small success rate. And that's okay. So be valuable to those people, grab a lot of them. The answer here is not, oh, spam a bunch of people to fill up the top end of the funnel. It's accept the fact that the goal is get them into the funnel and not close a deal. Like the goal of
Mhm.
close a deal will be much farther along in the process.
Yeah, that's the sense that you get when people are, like petrified
Hmm.
to DM people on LinkedIn or heaven forbid, pick up a phone.
I
You
mean,
know,
it's scary.
yeah, it's no fun, but it's you're not murdering someone.
It's
And
also
that's
a lot more scary if what you're doing is dumb. So if I'm DMing you to say, "Hey Jonathan, it would be great if you needed any machine tool consulting today." The reason that feels scary is because it's so awkward that you would do that.
right. And that's what they're thinking because they don't realize it's so far away. Because the reason they're even considering doing it is because they're desperate for work and they waited too long. They didn't keep their network warm. And so now they're panicking and, and they're like going in for the kill with the first DM. So of course, and like you said, of course it's awkward because what they're doing is awkward. It's like, nice to meet you. What should we name our kids? It's
I think if you're desperate for work, I mean, I'm not an expert in this and I've only reached, a modicum of success. So all I can do is talk about my experience. But if you're in that position where you're really scraping for everyone and like you really, really need the money, figure out what you can do to get money and do that. And don't be obsessed with the idea of I have a company or I'm a freelancer or I'm a soloist or I'm a this or that or another thing. Like if you need money, figure out your path to get money and give yourself space to make good decisions.
mm,
And it doesn't matter if that's going to work at a dog groomer
yeah,
or going to work at Amazon
Starbucks.
or whatever. Like give yourself the space and then while you are in that space, don't panic and do some volunteer work, right? Volunteer in the community, volunteer in the industry that you're interested in, find places where there is less commercial selling activity going on and that will be your reset button to start the networking process.
Yeah. I talk about it a lot of times in terms of cash flow because I get a lot of, especially in Ditcherville, there are a lot of sort of newer people who are newer to the freelancing experience, and and they always are asking about like, oh, value pricing. I'm like, I want to hit some home runs with like a value price proposal, and I'm always curious about I want to know like what their cash flow situation is, because if the cash flow situation is really tight, they're going to be all clenched up in the sales process. They're not going to listen. They're going to say yes to everybody. So it's a really bad for almost anybody I've ever met. If they're in a bad cash flow situation, they are it's nearly impossible to do a good job with something that's already hard, which is doing the why conversation and really understanding the client's motivation for why they would spend a bunch of money with you. Like trying to talk someone out of working with you when you need the money is next to impossible. So I tell them, I'm like, look, I don't care, bill by the hour, but just don't do it 40 or 60 hours a week. Go to an agency, go on Upwork, but figure out you got to have the space. I like the way you put it. You have to have the space to explore and be patient and uh, and go slow and play the long game. But if you don't know how you're going to pay your mortgage, do whatever, do anything. Even billing hourly if you have to, just to close a deal, so you don't have to worry about it. The trap with billing hourly, and if you're in a bad cash flow situation, is that you'll you'll tend to want to work as many hours as possible. And then you'll just end up in the same position in 6 months when that contract ends because you worked too much for the client and you didn't spend any time networking or, like you said, volunteering or anything. So it's like, if you're going to do it, try and keep it to 20 hours a week so that you've got a good 20 hours the rest of the time to do this other more patient type of gardening stuff.
Tim Ferriss of all people, I'd stopped listening to what he was up to for a long time. I read 4 Hour Work Week when it came out.
Yeah, me too.
Um, Many years passed. I somehow ended up listening to a long interview with him. I, I figure, oh, this guy's got this empire. He's super well off now. Like he's got to be rolling in the money, which may be true. But
Mhm,
what he told in this interview was like, hey, if you cut your cost of living really, really far, and in his case, it was move abroad to a low cost of living place.
mhm,
And, we're talking like compared to, big city in the United States, it would be like a factor of, I don't know, 100 times cheaper.
mhm,
And he basically said, if you can always find another way to squeeze out a cheaper way to live, that's a great way to find space because you don't have to sell anybody on anything. All you have to do is like engineer the rest of your life. And that
mhm,
it blew my mind that this guy with book sales and companies and media empire and all this stuff. I'm like, how is his advice coming down to, well, just live within your means and consider moving to a place with easier means. I was like, that blew my freaking mind because I spent last year when my income took a big hit, the first thing was, well, mostly the budgeting side. And then the second piece was, where's the money going to come from? And I would
mhm,
say that we didn't really come back to the consumption volume that we were at back when I had more money. Like
mhm.
I got a bigger contract and the income rebounded, but the consumption did not rebound in the same way because it turned out I actually didn't actually need a lot of the stuff that I'd been buying when I had a better paying job.
Right. Yeah, that happened with us at the beginning of COVID, where I was, sole breadwinner. Who knows what's going to happen?
Hmm.
What's going to happen to the economy? So I cut everything to the bone just in case,
Yep.
and ended up being one of my best years ever. But I didn't go back and rebuy all that stuff or resubscribe to all that stuff, you know.
Right.
So that is a good. It's people don't like to do that. Like it feels like a step backwards in your sort of lifestyle experience. But my experience is that there's a lot of stuff just starts to accrete that, like you just pay it every month. And it's just like, it's no big deal, whatever. But yeah, cutting your costs in a situation like that is another way to create space for you to be more patient with your networking, lead gen, biz dev, all that stuff. Uh, I've even seen people who, side hustler type people say like, well, look around. Do you have a garage you could rent? Airbnb your
Hmm.
house?
Hmm.
There's all these different things that you can do if you I think the trick here, you said it really well, is to not identify too strongly with like, I'm a whatever, I'm a business coach. And so the only money I can make is from business coaching. Like, think bigger about it and be like, all right, how could I either cut my costs significantly for a period of time, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, whatever, or what could I do that would be super easy that would bring me in uh, weird money, call it,
Totally.
and not feeling bad about like, oh, that's some kind of failure because I'm supposed to be making my money at this other thing. It's like that's way too limiting in a situation like that. Like, think way bigger.
So we're all out here just making it up as we go anyway. So
That's
it's
true.
don't worry about it being weird. It's not weird. There's always somebody else being weirder.
Right. All right. So yeah, I'm looking at the clocks as we wrap up here. What would you say to people who are just about to start freelancing or thinking about going solo? What advice would you have for them?
There's a couple. So I think I mentioned coattailing a while back. So find somebody that is going to be a mentor or a peer mentor, and all that you need from this is regular conversation of some kind that is going to pull you up and forward, and not down and back.
Hmm.
And you will, like, if you surround yourself with those type of people, or if you have even your the average of the five closest people to you, if those people are doing stuff that is going to be good for you, then you'll be fine.
Mm, excellent. And what's next for you? Where do you see it going in the next 18 months?
Yeah. think I got this super secret project that I'm working on.
Oh, really?
We're trying to use video game software like the Unreal Engine and Unity and stuff like that,
Uh-huh.
and then simulate factories.
That is crazy because you just gave me a Rolodex moment.
So I think I'm gonna my plan is to figure out a way to keep getting paid to do that for the next 12 months, and then after that, who cares? I'll figure it out from then.
All right, we'll have to talk off mic about that.
Sounds good.
Cool. Russ, where can people go to find out more about what you're doing? Maybe connect with you on your dusty old LinkedIn, something like that.
I'm all over the internet. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn or go to russwaddell.com. There's a contact page there. Reach out anytime.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks for joining me, Russ.
Talk to you next time.
Okay, folks, that's it for this week. I hope you join me again next time for Ditching Hourly. Bye.